Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode. Okay, I'm trying to say that word right, right? Of creating your desired life with me, Dr. Esther Graham. And I am super excited to be joining you again after just a quick little holiday and break. It's so good to be back. So good to see everyone. And I'm so super excited that everyone that will be joining me and my guest that's coming up, y'all. We're in the middle of the year, right? Before we only have what, maybe, y'all, we're in the middle of the year, I guess. I believe we've got what, maybe 5 months, maybe a little bit past the middle, really. 5 months. Until the ending of the year. And there's just so many things that's going on and so many things that's to be excited about. And so here we are again in creating your desired life, to where we have the pillars, the 7 pillars, 8 pillars that we often discuss. And today our focus is one of the pillars, which is relationships. Why this is important to me? Because when you have good, strong, healthy relationships, then your life is just so much better. It's so much more fulfilled when you have relationships that pour into you and you can pour into them. Relationships of trust, relationships of integrity, relationships to where you could laugh with and cry with, relationships where you can create a safe space all the time just to be who you are. And so I'm so excited to talk about relationships today. But before we get there, I just want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Life by Design community, the Festa della Donna community, and that is our marriage retreat, our marriage enrichment retreat. Stronger Together is coming up in December. It is December 11th through the 15th in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I want y'all to pay attention because, listen, we're going to be posting it on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and we're going to post it on the site. So if you are interested in coming to the marriage retreat, getting information about it, you will be able to get that information. The marriage retreat, we launched it, or I did, in June, and we sold out. We just want a small group, okay? So I don't want you all to think this is going to be very large. It's a small group. Why? Because we want it to be intimate. And so if you know if you're someone that's saying, I really want my marriage enriched, if you're someone, whether you've been married a year, less than a year, or 36, like my husband and I, or even others that are coming that have been married just a bit longer. In other words, it is for everyone. It's for everyone. You're married and you're saying, I just want to have my marriage enriched. I want us to grow stronger together. I want to work on communication. I want to work on our relationship. And so that's what we will be focusing a lot. Again, it's December 11th through the 15th in Scottsdale, Arizona, and you could check out the link. And if you live in the local area, if you live in the Scottsdale or Phoenix or area, you could literally come in for the day and join us each day. You can make a choice to stay on site with us. Or you could stay wherever you choose to. You could stay home and just travel in every day. And if that's something that you're interested in, please make sure that you reach out to support at fddwomen.com. Again, I say support at fddwomen.com. So just wanted to share that information with you really fast. So here we go, y'all. We have my very special guest today is Andrea Jones. And this is like a part 2 because Andrea came on earlier in the year. And this is a part 2 session because I love speaking with Andrea. She's a communication expert. And I think that when we're speaking about relationships, whether it's with your spouse, your significant other, your children, mother, father, co-worker, relationships and communication in relationships can be so challenging many times. And I say that because in my own relationship, with my spouse, one of the things that we really had to work on in our marriage is communication. And how do we communicate with each other so we can build a stronger relationship, a relationship that's based on truth and integrity, a relationship that's based on, honesty and just being who we are with each other and understanding each other in our own, let's say, love language, in the language that we speak. And so I'm excited to talk about that today with Andrea. I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about her. She has over 20 years experience in psychology, NLP, neuroscience, body language, and personal development. Andrea combines her background in business management, marketing, and television production to offer unparalleled insights into effective communication. In what we're going to discuss today, we're going to do a deep dive in communication and marriages. So welcome y'all to the stage, Andrea Jones.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hello.
Thank you for having me again.
Oh yeah, I'm so super excited to have you again. When we were on earlier this week, speaking, talking to each other earlier this week, I actually think it was yesterday, wasn't it? We just went into this conversation about communication and relationships in marriage, with our friends, just relationship overall, and how communication can just really be an issue, or a challenge in anything. It could be a challenge in business, challenge as leaders with our significant other, our spouse, in any part. Communication can really weaken our relationships, or it can strengthen it. And that's kind of where I want to start talking today, Andrea, is about the importance of communications in the relationships that we have.
I think I think it's huge. But, if you really think about it, any issue that we have typically comes down to communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's differences in perspectives and not wanting to get somebody to see the other side, wanting to get somebody to say that we're right, all of those things, or miscommunications. We lose a lot of money in business, like hundreds of thousands into the $1 million a year, in our businesses, because we think we're on the same page and we're not. In lots of ways, right? Or just really poor communication where somebody thinks that they're supposed to do one thing and they end up doing another, right? So, so there's so much, I think, around communication, but particularly in our lives, like you were saying right off the top, our happiness is tied. There's so many studies right now that are showing the power of our community is really linked to our level of happiness. And the more involved that we can be, the better that we can interact with people who are in our networks, in our world, the happier that we're going to be, right? So I think that's a huge, huge factor.
Okay. And communication is key. And so, there's different communication styles, right? And so I'd like to talk a little bit about a couple of communication styles that can really help us. And I guess in speaking about it, Andrea, I think, as the audience, the listeners, begin to identify what's your communication style. And then let's even link that to my communication style. And we'll talk about this a little bit, even can go into our love language.
Totally. And they're very different areas, I think, but they link together, right? So there are a bunch of different communication styles. So when we think about learning styles, we think of visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and then auditory digital learning styles, right? So people who are visual, they speak, I see what you're saying, right? Versus somebody who is auditory, they'll hear you. Or that rings a bell for them, or somebody who's kinesthetic will feel you. People who are auditory digital will have the auditory, but for them, what they need is sequential. So if they get information that's out of sequence, they get stuck. So if you go 1, 2, and 4, they've missed 3 and they've stopped on 2. So they're not following you anymore. So I think it's really important to understand your learning style, because you are going to speak and use words that match your particular learning style. And if you have somebody who's the same as you're going to get along really well. It's going to be great. But if you have somebody who's different, like for me, auditory is probably one of my most difficult ones to change and to use words around. So practicing that and helping somebody, we had a conversation once where I had said, like, I believe that 100% of the communication issue lies with ourselves. So if we can't get the other person to hear what we're saying, see what we're saying, then the more that you can adjust, the better off you're going to be, the more powerful communicator you are. And so the more people you can bring toward you, right? There's also a second set, and there's a bunch of, and I know you've done a lot of neuro-linguistic programming study, your master, I believe, yes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we also have ways that we relate to the world around us. So some of us have a toward motivation versus away motivation.
Right.
So when you are talking to somebody who has a toward motivation, you would talk about 100% success rate.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to somebody who has primarily an away motivation, and we'll all move away from pain.
Right.
But primarily, want to talk about a 0% failure rate. It is exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The way that you process that, right, for that person, or that person processes it, they're going to, when you say it in their language, they're going to think, this person gets me.
Yes.
And there's lots of things that we drop to show kind of what different styles or what way we use this metacognition to interpret the world around us. Yeah. So the more study that you can do, the better off you are.
And it's so true. I love what you said about, whether you're auditory, kinesthetic, any of that. I know I'm a very much a visual person. And so we could have communication. We can talk, but sometimes like I'll say, can you see it? Or I'll say, and I'll tell people I need to see it. So you can share something with me, but I have to sit and I have to visualize. Yeah. For it to really register. For it to register. And I love how you said, listen, and when you're in relationships and when you're communicating, listen to how the other person communicates. If they're saying, can you feel me? Can you see it? Can you hear what I'm saying? That's the type of communication style that they have. And so adapting, something many times that we don't want to adapt, or we don't feel that it's important for us to adapt. I think I told you the story once that I had a friend who said, well, I'm always this way. This is how I talk. This is how I communicate. This is how, and I said, and I'm never going to change. And I said, that's pretty sad, because when you have that mindset, then you limit yourself in so many ways with relationships. And let's just face it, no man is on an island by himself. We all need powerful, healthy, forward moving relationships. And when we choose not to understand the other person or understand their communication style, then we limit the level of relationships we could have with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, like a relationship is two people coming together, right? Yeah. And, it's not just we can have very one-sided relationships, but they're not going to be very deep, right? That person isn't going to feel super safe. They're not going to open up. They're not going to be authentic. And I think this is one of the biggest things for people to understand. And certainly in communication, I think this is very much within our relationships, especially, it's an inward journey. Mm-hmm. To figure out who you actually are and what you stand for and how you want to come across, right? So if you have somebody who is very fixed mindset, which is what you talked about, and they're not willing to listen, to hear, to change anything about themselves, you're right, it's a sad way of being, because they're very stuck in their comfort zone, right? And it makes sense. That's the way the brain works. So, that person is very much being ruled by the safety of the brain, wanting to keep them safe, right? but you never get to have more. You never get to have those rich relationships where it's actually synergistic. And I think this is what people want. A lot of people go into a relationship wanting to change the other person, thinking that they're going to be a different way, thinking that, right, like they're not going to change over time, which is
Never
also
will happen.
right, realistic. And in a relationship, you have to get to know each other over and over and over again. And I mean, certainly in my own relationship, and we've talked about this. My husband had a TIA, so it's like a mini stroke. And then his mental health did an absolute 180. So we had to reapproach our entire relationship after that happened because he's coming now from a very different area. So we have these challenges. And if we're not willing to adjust ourselves, then really we're saying no to the relationship. And I think in our marriages, this is huge, huge,
Oh
huge.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Like if you're not all in and a yes and willing to do everything without sacrificing yourself, right? Like that's not a relationship either.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to go all in with the relationships that matter most, whether that's with a spouse, whether that's with a child,
Yes.
a friend, whatever that is.
Yes.
And what are you willing to do? And is the other person also willing? Because
Yes.
if they're not, then you're just beating your head against a wall,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Because relationship is a two. It's two. You don't. You can have a relationship with yourself, but I mean, it takes two to have a relationship minimum, right? And so, you said about you have to know yourself. I really call it's that journey back to who you are. And until and I found this true for me, especially with my relationship with my husband, right? And when I look at other relationships I've had, even as an entrepreneur, as a businesswoman, I look at all of it, and my relationship really had to begin with me for the successful outcomes, right? I had to take that journey and discover who I am. I have to make sure that I'm healed in areas. And I also had to look at my own, how do I communicate? What's my communication style? And how am I communicating to my husband?
yeah.
Yeah. How am I communicating to my children? I have a daughter that said, my youngest daughter said to me one time, because I would say to her, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And so finally she said to me, I don't like it when you say to me, I need you to do something. Okay. So I had to change how I communicated to her, right? So she could understand what I needed, but giving her the choice and saying, can you do this for me? You understand what I mean? And so going back to how you really have to look at how you communicate so you can build that relationship in any of those relationships, as you said, that's most important to you.
Yeah, I agree. I think truly, truly, I think that every challenge that we have in a relationship is an invitation to ourselves to go deeper, to understand what we value, what our values are, to really understand our own belief system, like why we're coming at something in a certain way, why this is so important, where that started. And it can be super simple things, right? That, I've always done it this way, but like, why was it always done that way? What is it about that way that is actually really important to you? Like, there's certain things that are core components to who we are, and there's some things that are a little bit more superficial, and maybe they matter a little bit, but not a whole lot. I think, when you're dealing with parenting styles, this is something that comes up a lot. And we're a blended family, so we had a lot of things that came up. So we had to figure out what was like really, really important. And this is where I think, going inwards with yourself and also having your spouse do that is to figure out, what are the things that are most important to you? Like, what are high level? This is a non-negotiable for me. This has to be this way.
Yes.
Whether it's co-parenting, whether it's in the relationship, levels of respect, whatever it might be. This is something that is Definitely a solid rule for me, non-negotiable standard. What are things that I'm willing to negotiate on or move on? And then what are things that, kind of they don't really matter a whole lot, like,
Mm.
and they might be more important to your spouse. So I think it's really looking within yourself. Like if you don't know what's important to you, and a lot of us do this, like a lot of us go through life without truly understanding our
Yeah.
value set and our belief system because they started when we were 7. So we've just been living with them, right? And so
Yeah.
if you don't take the time to explore it, something could be coming up and up and up over and over and over again. But if you actually don't go below the surface, like one of the things we talked about yesterday was the lid on the toothpaste, right?
Yeah.
If your spouse doesn't put the lid on the toothpaste and it makes you crazy and you keep saying, I need you to do this, like, please put the lid on, and they still don't put the lid on, it's actually not about the lid, right? At that point,
Mm.
it's about respect. It's about not feeling loved. It's about not being heard. It's about, right? There are all those things. And then what makes that important, right? There could be things in your experience, in your background, that something that was really neat, like Jonathan being in the military, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure
Hmm.
everything is just so. And so when it's not that way, that can actually cause feelings of anxiety. It could, for a number of situations,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
If
Oh
you can
yeah.
understand and communicate what's happening for you, the more likely that person is going to have a better understanding of you and also you of them. This is not always just one-sided. So how
Yeah.
can you become more curious about the things that are really important to those people in your life, and understanding what makes it so will bring you together, and then you can have a much deeper relationship. Doesn't mean that you'll will always agree
Yeah. I like
everything.
to say you can agree to disagree.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to,
You have
right?
to. Yeah. 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 I know Jonathan and I mean, communication is something that we have worked on quite a bit, and just very intentional with working on it. Um, because it was so important in our marriage, for our marriage to be strong and for us to continue in our marriage. You know what I mean? And the lack of communication hinders, for my experience, all the other areas as well. Because so communication, we needed to communicate about everything, about family, about ministry, about, business, about personal. But here is it. I also, or I should say, we really had to discover how to communicate with each other and have the non-negotiables, you know? And so it really took me understanding some things about him and his communication style, and him understanding me as well, and being willing to say, this relationship is so important to me. It's a non-negotiable. So we're going to sit and we're going to hash out how we communicate with each other. And I remember when we began, journey years ago, with, understanding each other and communication. And I stress years and years ago because it's something that's continual. We still work on communication. Do you understand what I mean? We communicate well with each other. We laugh. We don't, our communication has gone, it's like totally have changed, but we still work on it. I was telling you yesterday that sometimes I get emotional. And so I have to make sure that and I can communicate emotionally. So I have to check myself all the time, in communicating emotionally, but, and not do it and wait till I'm not emotional so I could say exactly what I want to say, the way I need to say it, so he could understand and hear what I'm saying. Because there is a big difference. I know for Jonathan, if I'm emotional, I'm communicating, he'll just shut down, and there's a certain way that if he chooses to communicate with me, I'll shut down as well. So we have worked to understand what our communication triggers are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our triggers, so we can temper ourselves, work on ourselves, and then come back and let's communicate effectively so we can get the results that we want. Woo!
Ooh, I think it's so important. I think you need to set your rules of engagement,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Which
what
is
it
kind of what
is.
guys have done. And you made a really great point is, when we're really emotional, we're in our limbic brain, right? We're in that fight or flight brain,
Mm-hmm.
or freeze, fight or flight brain.
Yeah, yeah,
And so what happens is, right, like we our thinking part of our brain just completely shuts down. It's why after a fight you think, oh, I should have said this and I should have said this and I should. Well, you literally could not think that at that time until you disengaged,
yeah.
right? So it's really important to understand that when we are emotional, it really is not the best time to make a decision or to
Yes,
have a really important conversation, right? Like it's not, and that includes really happy times too, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
if you're feeling really happy about something and you're trying to make an important decision, and you're in this state of bliss, you're less likely to think about the risks that might be associated with it, right? So that's why it's really important to take that step back. But I do think every couple really should think about, like, what are the rules when they engage, when there's something that is not going well? How are you going to talk about it? Is it okay to go to bed angry? Is it not? Can it go a couple of days? Do you make the appointment to talk about it? How long will you let it go? Because I know, like, people need time to process, and I think that
yeah.
that's really important to figure
Oh,
out where
very important.
yeah come from, right? So if you have that processing time, then you're able to reapproach, then you're able to go back and go, okay, is this, where is this in my belief system? Why is this so important to me? What values are being hit? Like, what's happening? And then when you can reapproach in a way that's um, has a greater depth to it, a greater understanding, hopefully you can be able to communicate that, and same with the other person. And then really being open, and I think this is the big thing, being open, being curious to the other person's side as well.
So important.
Yeah, like, where are they coming from with it? And if you truly, truly love that person on the other side of the table, the more curious you can become, the more accepting. Again, you don't have to agree, but it's okay to accept that they have a different opinion. You're two individuals coming together. You're not going to agree on everything. Like, that would be
And if
crazy.
you do, you may want to sit back and say, wait a minute,
Yeah,
Do I
right.
really? Yeah, yeah.
Are we actually talking or doing things that are deeply important to us? If not, are we surface living then, right? And then that might be something to also, like, are you always in your comfort zone and never challenging? Like, you get to learn about your spouse or any significant other in your relationship, child, best friend, whatever it might be, when you put yourself in new situations, right? And so that's when a lot of people feel the most energized in their relationships, is when they go somewhere new, they do something new, rather than sitting side by side on the couch, watching TV, or even just in your own living room. You may be having a conversation, but because you're in the same environment, it doesn't open up to these new learnings. Like, there's lots of things that you can expose yourselves to, like just going to a new place in your town that neither one of you have ever been. And it can open up different conversations or experiences that you get to learn new things about each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, to have that lack of stagnancy, right? To always be open and engaging and learning. And yeah, I think that that's really important for our own happiness, and that in our relationships too.
Yeah, definitely. And then, and I believe you mentioned it also, knowing how to communicate with that spouse. I kind of, think about when we go to another country and they don't speak English, there's a communication barrier. So we have to learn some of their language. Might not be a lot, but we have to we can't go to China and speak English to the Chinese people, right? And if they don't speak English, expect for them to understand. I always think about that. And so it's necessary for me to understand how my spouse or my children, like my daughter who says, I need, understanding how they communicate, understanding them so I could speak their language so they could understand where I'm coming from, and then vice versa. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you
Yeah.
bring up things too, because, cultural differences, family communication differences just even like town to town, community to community. When I think about, there's big cultural differences, but then there's also differences between states and so on. So where you've grown up, how the people around you communicated well, it has a massive impact. It's how you learn. So you may have not liked it and gone in a totally different direction, or this is just the way that we've always communicated. Like for me, you and I are very similar. I was very explosive when I got angry, and that's what happened in my house. Like we yell, like there were screaming matches in my house, right?
Yeah, yeah,
For my
yeah.
youngest son, that was like he'd never experienced that, because Dean is very, very calm, like and so he'd never heard his dad yell, and so that was like something that was like shocking for him. So it was definitely something that I learned. It was a very big part of my emotional journey, into emotional intelligence and so on, to figure out how do I stop that from happening before it gets explosive.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. I, I think sometimes we take communication lightly. We don't really see the importance of it when it comes to relationships. And when I say relationships, again, we're all relationship, not just your spouse, your significant other, but one of the most important relationships for me is communication with my children, really making sure. I think that's like such a non-negotiable for me, and then communication with my employees or my colleagues, in business and everything. It just really sets the stage, I believe, for clarity and understanding and for trying to build the strong relationship where you start how to communicate. So, Andrea, let me rephrase the question again. How, if you're a person that, and you're listening to this conversation, you're saying, I know I've got some communication issues, or you're saying I'm a well communicator, but I could do better. What are some ways how can we start recognizing, and how can we start communicating to where it builds us up?
I think that the first part is understanding your communication style, I think, and kind of where do things break down? Like where are your triggers? Like we talked about, what are your emotional triggers? What things are you really good at, do you think, in communication? And where might you need to expand, right, a little bit more? And even just doing something as simple as asking other people who are close to you to say, I want to improve my communication. What's one thing that I could do to communicate better with you? And then being really open to receiving whatever you receive
Yeah, yeah,
from that,
yeah.
and then taking that, because there's a grain of truth in all of it, and I think the more that you can take that and run with it, the better that you're going to be. And then I think it is really going deep with the people who are most important to you, and to say, like, how can we communicate better? What are things, like, not can we, it's how can we,
How can
right?
we? Yeah,
And I think that's a really important thing to remember, with this, is we all have areas that we can get better with. And then really then opening up, because each person's going to be different, each relationship. You'll have some people that just know what you're thinking, right? And you don't have to communicate as much. But then also coming back and rephrasing, did I get that right? I
right,
heard
right.
this. And then that gives the opportunity to person to say, yeah, it was this, and this, and I also said,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so to get the information, understand if you're on the same page or not. I know you and I chatted quickly. I think I shared the story about the chicken, right? Like my husband and I, he wanted to make a recipe. And so he asked me to get chicken thighs. So in my head, I was thinking boneless, skinless chicken thighs. So that's what I picked up. But he was thinking bone and skin on for the particular
yeah,
recipe that he
yeah,
had. So we have these areas where there's a communication breakdown because we think we're visualizing or we're on the same page as the other person, and we're not. When that happens, take the opportunity to back up and go, okay, how could we have made this communication
yeah,
better? We both went on the assumption that we were talking about the same thing. So was there something that could have been done differently? And I think that in every relationship is something that you can go into it and say, like, let's be open with this, and be open to also say to the people who are most important, tell me when I can do, like your daughter, awesome for her for stepping up and saying, this doesn't feel good to me. And even like wonderful for you too, because you're like, I accept that. I hear that. Okay, so this is really important to you. It could be helping to understand why the word need causes anxiety, because it might be I need to act on this right now. Might be the anxiety that's underlying. So it would be maybe important to help her understand why, so she can explain that, and also for you to better understand how to communicate better, right? So to be open to saying, in these moments where the communication goes astray, how can I reapproach and do this in a better way for you?
That's so good. So good. What about, in conflict? Have those conversations.
I'm getting a dropout again.
So how do we have the difficult conversation in communication? Where would we say? I know my husband and I have a process, but I'd like to hear, what your thoughts are, because sometimes in relationships we have to have difficult conversations. That communication is so important. How do we start that? Because many of us, that's where it's difficult.
For sure. It is difficult to have difficult conversations, right? For all of us, because they don't feel good, right? And it brings up a lot of emotion. So I think, because like we've said previously, if you're really emotional, you don't want to step into that, right? So I think it's the first thing when it's a difficult conversation is to recognize when you are emotionally triggered, and to be able to say to that other person, this is how I'm feeling right now. I need to disengage at this point, right? It's not that I don't want to talk about it. I need to come back to this when I'm in a better state. And then I think, which is such a huge win. I know, with my daughter, that was a huge win for me, especially when we were both really emotional, for one of us to be able to say, I'm too emotional right now. I need to back out. And then I think it's going and understanding. I think whether this is a difficult conversation in business or in our relationships, one of the first things that we need to do is figure out what is the result that we want to have from the communication. And then what are the things? Yeah, right. Because I think we often go in and we're upset about something and we want to talk about it, but we don't necessarily understand the things that we want to get out of it particularly. And in business, I actually was coaching with a woman a while back. She was having some real difficulties with a person she was contracted to. And it wasn't that they had really bad communication, but they had a third person in the middle of it. And so, I said to her, like, what's the result that you want? And she's like, well, I want this relationship to be better. It's like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Right? Like, what does that actually mean? So she said, I want to have direct communication. Great. Okay. So that's one of the things that she took out of it. And she wanted to have regular check-ins and, those types of things. So what's the result that you want? And then what are the KPIs if we go to business? What are the key performance indicators, right? That need to happen in order for you to reach that. And then it's being open to that other person. So I think this is where you go away, you can process it, you can figure out what's the result that you want, what's the underlying factors that are triggering it, what's upsetting about it, and what are the steps that you both need to take together. And then it's opening the door of, how do they feel about that? What's going on with them within this, right? What's causing their side, the experience that they've had, or how they might be feeling around it. And then how do they see, right, those steps? And then that's where you can come together and go, okay, hopefully your results aren't on opposite sides, right? And if they are, then you have a whole other, path to navigate. But as you're open to hearing the other side, to understanding what's important to you and why, I think it's going to have those steps, right? And then how much time in between you're processing to when you talk about it. I think that's really important,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like in my first marriage, I got the silent treatment. I
Right.
was
Right.
hard. Yeah. First of all, for me, it was like it felt awful. It was very triggering for me, and then I was
Mhm.
very, very emotional
Yeah.
communicator at that time. So I'm going to
Same
think
here.
everything you could possibly say in all my responses, but not necessarily the result that I wanted to get out of it.
Yeah.
Right. So not a good thing. So how long? Is it 24 hours? Is it 1 hour? For my
Yeah.
husband, he'll allow me to walk away because sometimes I need to walk away to process, but he actually won't let it go like the whole day. It's too stressful.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's too stressful for me too. So, then, and sometimes we'll come back around to it, right? It's like, I'm going to come back to that again, but we don't let it go for very long. So what's the process that you and Jonathan use? Because I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about what you said, what you just said is before I answer that, we don't let it go too long. I know for me, the same thing. I have to walk away. I have to disengage and I have to process it as well. I have to think it through. And so, I may not go back to it like on that same day. It just all depends on what it is. Right. But definitely by the next day, at some point, we have to talk about whatever this is. So it's definitely important for me to process. And it is for him as well. We just kind of disengage and walk away and we think about it. So when we come together, we can talk about it and hear, listen, to understand what each other is saying or how we feel about it. So one of the things that I use often is when, especially in the very difficult conversations, is beginning with always something positive. It's a practice that I use. I'm an educator. It's a practice that I use with students, in early childhood. You always talk about what's going great first, So I may start off with, what I really respect about you is how you, depending on the situation, how you blah, 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 blah. And then I go into what I need from him and maybe what I didn't like. And so how can we change that? And then he gets to do the same thing if that's needed. Can we compromise? I could easily say I'm sorry that I made you feel or I made you think that I'm good with this when I'm actually not. So I take responsibility for maybe how I may have miscommunicated, or you understand what I mean? Something that wasn't really meant to be. And so I'll apologize and I will say, I'm sorry if I made you think that I was okay with you planning out this activity for me when I really wasn't. Moving forward, I'm going to make sure that I communicate this effectively, or I let you know immediately how I'm feeling, what I like and what I don't like. So I find like with us, once we begin to talk and we make the course correction, we ensure that that course correction is implemented.
And what I want to interject in this, what I love about this is that you're coming at it from I take responsibility for this side. This is how I feel. This isn't a you did, you do, right? As soon as you do that, you're heading right back into head-to-head confrontation because that person now it feels diminished, right? They'll feel more like shrinking.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when it's like, this is how I feel in this, you can't really argue about that because it is
Yeah.
how you feel.
How I
And
feel. No one could tell you how to feel.
yeah, and it's not blamey either that, this is all your fault. This is
Yeah.
all what you do.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes it really is a lack of understanding about the things that are important or the things, because often, Jonathan maybe it doesn't bother him that you plan things for him. It's right. Like he doesn't have to do it. This is great. I don't have to plan it. Right. But the other side around. So we always have to remember where the other person's coming from.
Yeah.
Right.
So important in every relationship. And so with relationships and communication in the relationship, it's really each person and understanding each other. You know what I mean? Understanding what, what's important and what's not. Here's this. Um, Last week, for example, or week before last, no, it was, I believe it was last week. We were, I had to head out of town, right? And, for a conference or a business meeting. And Jonathan, we're all headed to the airport at the same time, but we were going in two different directions, same airport. I'm headed to Phoenix. He's headed to Atlanta to spend some time with our son who had surgery. And so he was going to support him. And, he already said the time for the airport that we are leaving. And so I'm making sure I'm ready to leave at that time because I know when it's time to leave how he gets and boom, boom, boom. So I'm all ready. I already communicated to him that I needed to make one stop before we headed to the airport, right? And he said, okay, so then we're going to have to leave about 30 minutes early. This is the drop dead time. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm making sure I'm ready because I don't want to delay anything. I want to make sure that he doesn't say Esther, 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 because one of the things I don't like is when he blows the horn at me. It just, and so triggers me, right? And so I want to make sure that, so he communicate the time. Well, don't you know, I'm looking at the time we leave and I see him get on the lawnmower to mow the lawn. And I have to tell you, I looked and I said, what is going on here? And so I said, okay, well, maybe that time is switched, but I'm ready. I'm looking 30 minutes later. I'm like, wait a second. So I go and I look at the lawnmower. I look at him and I'm like, by now, Andrea, I'm like, oh, my daughter, Ani, was there and a friend of ours, and they were headed to the airport because they're going with me to Phoenix, and they're just laughing because I'm like, I'm now all in a, you know what I mean? And so when I get like this, I just want to, again, communication, emotion. I just want to say, hey, but. And so I was like, let me just, So he finally, he sees me. He goes, he looks at the time. He didn't realize it. So now in his mind, he's thinking he's got all this time. He didn't pay attention to the clock, right? And so he goes, okay, I'll be ready in 5 minutes. No, you're not. I have to tell you. So because I knew I was hot, very upset, I just was quiet, driving all the way to the airport, and he's going that, we got there in great time and everything. But I just had to say to myself, how important is this for me?
Yeah. Will you remember this 5 years from now?
Well, I remember this 5 years from now. Yeah, how important. So we just drove to the airport. I said one or two words here and there. He's talking to me like regular, and I just want to jump across this.
Yeah.
Because he knows I'm upset with him, right? He knows I'm upset. So I'm like, okay. And so I'm answering. And so we get out and he drops us off first because he's going to go park the car and then he's, going to his airline. And so he comes and he kisses me and I went, and he just starts to laugh. And I looked and I said, it's not funny. By the time, I get to where I'm going, he gets to where I'm going, we're back to talking normal, we're back to talking normal. And so, but again, looking at, the whole picture and how important was this really to me? Does it, and it was like, this is just, it's just like, no big deal. But that evening we're talking, how was your trip? Oh, my trip was great. How was yours? I think that's important. Like, is this really a deal breaker here?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely, right? Like you were rushing to make sure that he was happy and then he just missed the time, right?
Yeah.
So can understand because you were trying so hard to be on time, right? And so I can see how this could be set up. But I think that's the big thing is like what are you willing to hold on to, right? And it's those the grudges that if you let them go, they build and build and build and build. And then that creates so many more issues. So far better, like he may know. Sometimes the guys don't know. They actually don't know that it's a problem. So they don't pick up body language cues as well as women do. So,
Not at all. Except when you're
exactly,
going.
exactly. That was a good one. That was a very good one.
But what I realized, as you talk about, discovering what was that trigger, I realized that one of the things that made me upset, at that moment was that I worked so hard to be ready on time.
Yeah.
And you're not ready because normally I'm like, running around trying to get out there. And I don't like him blowing the horn at me saying, Esther, come on, we got to go. Or call, because I realize we have to go. So to alleviate all of that, so he wouldn't be frustrated, I'm all ready. And he decides we're going to be gone so long and the grass is going to grow too long. And so let me just go ahead and do a quick cut. Well, if you saw our yard, you would know that was not possible. And in my mind, I have to tell you, communication, right? Because now it's that self-communication as well, that internal. In my mind, I'm thinking, why didn't he just call the gardener?
Yeah.
And so what happens sometimes really fast is that we do a lot of internal communicating with ourselves, and we have to be careful of that as well, because that could really trigger some things, and then you're all the way left.
Exactly. And, those stories that we tell ourselves, we
Those
have to remember
stories.
they are stories, right? They are
Mhm.
stories. And when we keep bringing those stories up, we can keep a lot of things active that really don't need to be. And so, is the story that you're telling yourself the best story for you, right? To lift you up in this moment rather than, going down that negative spiral. So I think really understanding what's happening in your own head is also a huge, huge part of your communication and your communication style. Because when we got that story built up, we're going into a situation with
Yeah.
preconceived notions, which may not be true on that other side. So
Yeah.
again, really check what's going on in your own head. So
Yeah, check what's going on, the story you're telling yourself, the perspective, and all of that. And I have to tell you, when he laughed, and I said, "That's not funny." When I walked away, he doesn't know until he listens to this. I had to laugh myself, and I said, "How stupid." You know what I mean? But it takes that conversation, that communication, that knowing yourself, knowing all of that. And it does take time when you're building a relationship with someone. It does take time to learn their communication style and even to be aware of what yours are. So as we close, Andrea, what's some advice that you can give all of the listeners?
I think the biggest thing is stay curious. Stay curious about when somebody says something, oh, that's really interesting. I never thought about it that way. Tell me more. You may not agree, but you'll get a better understanding of that
Yeah,
person and
yeah,
what makes them tick. And the more that you can understand what makes them tick, the better the communication will be and the better the relationship will be.
yeah.
So I think curiosity, honestly, for yourself and for the people around you is the key to really building better relationships.
Yeah. And for that person who needs to have a difficult conversation, how would they begin? What's your suggestion on how they would begin to have that difficult, authentic conversation?
Again, I think start with the result that you want,
Yeah.
right? What is the result that you want and what's stopping you from getting there right now?
Right.
And then that is going to give you your key points to talk about and to cover. And
Yeah.
I think when you go into that difficult conversation, like you said really well, is not to be blamey about the other person,
Yeah.
is to say, this is what I've noticed that's happening, or, here's where we're not meeting whatever we wanted to meet, or what's really important to me. And here's what I think we can do about it. And I think when you approach it in that way, you open up a greater dialogue. But then also remember to be curious and
Yeah.
then ask the other person, what are their thoughts on it?
Yeah.
Do they see a better way? What do they see differently?
Yeah. I'm glad you add that. Ask the other person, do they see a better way? Because one of the things that I do is, if, once I say this is what I would like, this is the results I would like, then I ask, can you do that? You know, because the other person in that relationship needs to have the choice to say to you, yes, I can, or no, I can't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then that way you know exactly where you are. And just because, by the way, if you're listening, just because someone says to you at that moment, no, they can't do that in your community right now, no doesn't mean no forever. Maybe they still need time to process what you've said or to really do some internal search as well to come there. And so you could always go back. You could then say, well, can we revisit this at a different time? Or say, can you tell me why? And then you listen to understand their reasoning and then make a decision. Can we revisit this or come to a compromise?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a big
Yeah,
thing is to remember that no, I can't is not a lack of respect for
it's
you
not. It's
and
not.
your thoughts, right? Or what
Um,
you need to have happen. It might just be that, right, they are not able to, for whatever reason that might be. And then again, what you said, tell me why. Like,
yeah,
what's going on behind that so I have a better understanding.
yeah.
And then, yeah, being able
Great.
to reapproach if you can and being able to let go if you can.
Yeah, yeah. And so for our audience, what I'd like for them to take away is that, for them to begin to look at their communication style. You know, where is it, and you could even ask your person, that person that's the most important, that you really want to have a great established relationship with them, that's forward moving, that's positive, that brings you joy, that serves you and you serve them. It's just such a powerful relationship. Sometimes asking, on a scale from 1 to 10, you know, how can I improve my communication or my relationship with you through communicating? On a scale from 1 to 10, and have them rate it. And if they say, oh, it's a 7, okay, tell me, why is it a 7?
Yeah.
Because then you could say, okay, now what is it I need to do to move it to a 7.5?
Yeah.
You know,
And I
and
think
then,
question is giving you a 10 too.
yeah, 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 exactly. Yes. And but doing that, I think, really helps in how we begin to learn each other and how to communicate with each other. And so therefore how to build the relationship. By the way, if you're an entrepreneur as well and you've got leaders in your business, doing that with them, it's so important, because leadership sometimes, when you're communicating with your colleague or someone that works for you, making sure that they understand if they're not doing something, really look at how you're communicating to them. You
Yeah, I
know,
think that's really important because there's lots of times where I've explained something or, I've said something and then somebody will ask a question and I'm like, oh, that actually is a really good question because I have all of the moving parts in my head. I
yeah,
know what I'm doing, what I'm talking about, but that person on the other side of the table doesn't have the same information.
yeah,
And so I think that that's such a huge, huge thing. Yeah, is to be open to those questions, but also to understand that just because you have all of it doesn't mean necessarily that they have
that they have
all
it.
of the parts. Yeah.
Yeah. And realizing too how you're communicating, because sometimes we can think that we're communicating directly, but we're not. We're not saying exactly what we want and what we don't want. We're implying. And so
Yes.
there's implied communication, right? To where you're like, my husband checked me on that one day when I said, oh, I would really like a cup of coffee. And he looked and said, if you want coffee, ask me for coffee. But saying that's implied, and I'm thinking in my mind that I did ask you for coffee. I see him going downstairs. I did ask him. And he's like, no, you didn't ask. You said I would really like a cup of coffee. And he could really turn around and say, oh, great. Yeah, I would too. So who's going to get the coffee? You understand? But so being able to communicate directly and then really look at also how you're communicating, right? So direct, and then how you're saying it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This has been a great conversation. A lot, I think, for our listeners to really look at, listen to, jot down. I hope that you're making notes on how to communicate with your significant other, with your spouse, in your business, and anything that's important to you. Any closing thoughts, Andrea?
I just think, remember, we don't come with user's manuals. And so the more that we get to know the people in our lives and what makes them tick, the happier that we're going to be. So take that time, become curious, and really, go deep in your relationships and enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. Take that time to become curious and go deeper in your relationships and enjoy. So I'm going to even say that's like the power move for the day. So begin by becoming curious.
Exactly.
Begin by becoming curious and taking that time. Thank you so much for joining me on another, how do you say the word, episode? Is that right? Did I say that right? They tease me and they tell me that I added an H to it. I'm like, okay, well, you know what my excuse is. I'm not originally from the United States, so I could, I sound like I am, but I'm not. But thank you for joining us. I appreciate you. Looking forward to having you once again as we're the next time going even in a different direction, because I think communication is an important issue. And as we can see, I know in the United States, here we are, so many communication issues going on. Let's talk about it. Let's really get to the deep dive of how we communicate effectively with each other. Thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you and talking to you again.
Thank
Have
you
a
again.
great,
So appreciate it.
yeah. Bye-bye. So everyone, that was such a powerful conversation. I hope that you took notes. And so let's just go into some reflection at the moment. And what I'd like for you to think about, becoming curious. How can you become curious in the relationship that you're having right now, that you have? The most important relationship that you have, how can you become curious so that you can up level your communication with them? And so therefore have a powerful relationship, a relationship that's fulfilling and brings you joy, not once in a while, but every day. So let's do some self-reflection. What I would like for you to do is just take a moment and think about that and jot some notes down. It's time for self-reflection. Awesome, awesome. Self-reflection, mindfulness, being very intentional about being very curious about your relationships and, and how you're communicating with. Okay, so a quick question. Ask Dr. Esther. Woohoo, woohoo. So the question is, and from Nicole from West Virginia, her question is, what's the trick to staying together for so many years? That's a great question. So Nicole, my husband and I, as you know, we've been married for 36 years. And well, you may not know, but I'm sure you've probably heard me talk about it. And the trick is just doing work on yourself. I think that's one of the biggest tricks. Really, I did a lot of personal development, and so did my husband. And once I began to go on this journey of personal development, really uh, being very self-aware of who I am, who I was created to be, what are my triggers, what are my hurts, what are my pains, and then um, doing the work to make sure that I'm healed, make sure that I know who I am and I can communicate that. Also, being very authentic in my communication with my spouse, with my husband, being very transparent and understanding his needs and understanding, his communication style as well. And so that's really that's really the answer, is that first it begins with you, and it begins with what are the results you want in a relationship, and then coming together and having those very powerful discussions. And honestly, we attended marriage enrichment seminars and courses and all of those things to really build our relationship. And so that's why we're together. We're really best friends. We've learned each other along the path, having that willingness to stay together no matter what. So thank you for asking the question. I hope that that helps you a lot as you continue your journey in your relationships as well. So let me give you the quote. It's a very simple quote. I believe I've used this quote before. I'm going to read it, so I have to put on my glasses, y'all. And the quote for this is the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And it's George Bernard Shaw that said that. The most, and then here's the other communication. Most successful people I've known are the ones who do more listening than talking. So that is the other quote that I have for you today. Make sure that as you're communicating, that your communication, that you look at to how you're communicating, and then make sure that you're also listening, right? Listening in your communication. Listen to what the other person is saying. Listen to understand and not to respond. I'm so grateful that all of you chose to join. I do have a celebration. I just launched my podcast, y'all, and you could, wherever you get your podcast, you'll be able to find my podcast. It's called Unmuted Faith. Unmuted Faith. And so search it, and several segments of that. So join me for Unmuted Faith podcast. So that's what I'm celebrating my brand new podcast. Yay! I'm so glad that you made the decision to join me today. Make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure that you check out the Marriage Enrichment Seminar or the Marriage Enrichment Retreat that's coming up. And make sure that that you just follow me on Facebook, Instagram, on LinkedIn. I cannot wait to see you. Take care. God bless you, and have a great week on purpose. Be very intentional about living your life by design. Bye-bye.